Where did the moon actually come from? Modern science still cannot agree, because the moon breaks its own rules. Too big, too light, too perfectly placed. The Sumerians did not argue. A 4,000-year-old tablet says the moon was not born beside the Earth at all. It was brought here, caught during a crash between two worlds, and steered into orbit on purpose. The same tablet describes what the builders left inside it. And in 1970, two Soviet scientists wrote a paper saying almost exactly the same thing. Now let me show you what the tablet says. It was the year 2100 before our era, in the city of Ur, on the low river plain in the south of what is now Iraq. A scribe sat in the shadow of a stepped tower that rose higher than anything else for 100 miles in any direction. That tower was a ziggurat, and it was not built for a king. It was built for the moon. The Sumerians worshipped the moon as a living god. They called him Nana in the old tongue, Sin in the later one. He was not a small god in their religion. He was one of the most important gods they had, older than the sun god, older than the storm god. The first great city of the south, Ur, was his city. Its high priestess answered to no one but the king. And the way the Sumerians described their moon god is the first strange thing about this story. They did not describe Nana as a light in the sky. They described him as a traveler, a being who arrived. The hymns call the moon a boat, a ship that crossed the night carrying the god inside it, and they are very clear that the boat came from somewhere else and was placed where we now see it. For a long time, scholars read that the obvious way. Poetry. Old people making nature into a person the way every culture did. The moon moves across the sky, so they imagined a boat. Nothing more. But one tablet does not fit that reading. It is catalogued as Ni 2451, found in the temple records at Nippur and now kept in Istanbul. Most visitors walk straight past it. It looks like every other record tablet in the case. Gray clay, packed script, a corner broken off. But this one is not a list or a deal, it is a description. And what it describes is the origin of the moon itself. The tablet says the moon was not always in our sky. It says there was a time the night was empty of it. Then, it says, the moon was carried across the heavens and fixed into place above the earth, and that from that night forward the tides answered to it and the months were counted by it. The word the scribe uses for fixed into place is the same word the Sumerians used for setting a base stone into a wall. On purpose, placed, built. Think about that for a second. A Bronze Age scribe, writing about the moon, chose a building word. Not a birth word, not a word for something that grew or formed. A word for something that was set in place by hands, and the tablet does not stop there. It tells you where the moon came from before it was brought here. To understand that part, you have to look at a different Sumerian text, one most people have heard of without knowing it, the Enuma Elish. It is the great creation story of Mesopotamia, written down by the Babylonians but built on Sumerian roots far older. And at its center is a crash. The story describes two great bodies in the early heavens. One of them, called Tiamat, is a world of water. The other comes in from the far dark on a long, slow path and strikes her. The epic describes Tiamat being split. One half becomes the sky. One half becomes the earth. Her broken pieces become a big band of broken rock strung across the heavens. And Tiamat had a companion the epic lifts above all the others, a figure it names Kingu. In 1976, a writer named Zecharia Sitchin read that crash, not as myth, but as a memory. A real account of something that happened in the early solar system. In his reading, Tiamat was a watery world that once circled where the asteroid belt now sits. The intruder shattered her. Her remains became the Earth, knocked into a new path, and the broken rock of the crash became the asteroid belt that still circles the sun in a ragged ring. And Kingu, the figure the epic names at Tiamat's side, Sitchin read as her largest moon. A moon that survived the ruin of its parent world, caught by the new Earth, and dragged into orbit around it. Kingu became the moon. Most scholars reject Sitchin's translations, and many of their complaints are fair. He stretched words, he filled gaps with his own answers. But here is the part the critics rarely face. Sitchin did not invent the idea that the moon was a caught body that came from somewhere else. The Sumerians wrote that down. He just put it in front of a modern crowd. The tablet at Nippur and the Enuma Elish were saying it 4,000 years before he was born. And the Sumerians were not the only ones who remembered a time before the moon. Far to the west, hundreds of years later, Greek writers wrote down a strange story about a people called the Proselenoi, a word that means, plainly, the ones from before the moon. The Arcadians claimed their ancestors had lived in the land before the moon was ever in the sky. Aristotle mentioned it. Apollonius of Rhodes wrote it into his story of the Argonauts. Plutarch repeated it. Most history writers treat it the way they treat the Sumerian hymns, as an old brag about being very old, but it is the same claim. There was a time the night was empty of the moon, and then there was not. You find versions of it spread across the old world. Some African and South American stories describe the sky before the moon arrived, and the disaster that came with it, floods, darkness, a sky that had changed overnight. None of these cultures were in touch when these stories were first told, yet they keep circling the same impossible memory. The moon has not always been there. It came, and the world it arrived over was never the same again. The Sumerians simply wrote it down earliest and in the clearest, most careful words on a tablet that names the event as a placing rather than a birth. But the version you have heard, the tidy one about poetic old people imagining boats in the sky, that is not the full picture. Because when modern science finally turned its tools on the moon, it did not find a normal natural moon. It found exactly the kind of thing the Sumerians described. Something that does not belong where it is. Start with the size. The moon is huge compared to the planet it circles. Most moons in the solar system are tiny next to their worlds, caught asteroids or small icy chunks. The Earth's moon is more than a quarter of the Earth's width. There is no other rocky planet with a moon anywhere near that size. By the normal rules of how planets and moons form together, it should not exist at this scale. Then there is the way it sits. The moon is locked. It turns exactly once for every orbit it makes, so it always shows us the same face. In all of human history, before we had spacecraft, no one had ever seen the other side of it with their own eyes. One half is aimed at the Earth at all times. And when space probes finally took pictures of the hidden side in 1959, it looked nothing like the face we know. No broad dark plains, almost no smooth seas, just a cratered, crowded, strange crust. The two halves of the moon do not match, and geologists are still arguing about why a single natural body would be built so lopsided. Then there are the metals. The rocks the astronauts carried home were strange. Some moon samples ran unusually rich in titanium and in heat-resistant metals, the kind of high-heat metals you would link to metalworking rather than to raw, untouched stone. Vassin and Shcherbakov pointed straight at this. A natural moon, they argued, should not have a surface dusted with the kind of metals you would expect from a built shell. The people who defend the usual story have answers, and the answers work on paper, but every one of them asks you to accept one more thing that should not be there. Now the weight. This is the detail that should have stopped people cold. The moon is far too light for its size. On average, each small block of it weighs about 3.3 grams for every cubic centimeter. The Earth weighs about 5.5. A body that formed beside the Earth, out of the same stuff, should be about as heavy as the Earth. The moon is not. It weighs as if a large part of its inside is missing. That is not a typo. A body the size of the moon, made of solid rock and metal, should be much heavier than the moon actually is. The numbers say there is empty space down there, or stuff so light it has no business being inside a planet-sized body. Geologists have known this since the first careful measurements, and they still do not have a clean answer for it. And then there is the spot it sits in. The moon sits at almost exactly the distance and angle needed to make total solar eclipses, where the moon covers the sun perfectly, no more, no less. The sun is 400 times wider than the moon and almost exactly 400 times farther away. That match is so exact it makes some astronomers visibly uneasy when you bring it up, because there is no rule of nature that makes it happen. It just is. The moon is placed so exactly that, in the Sumerian text, It is called on purpose. Stack them up. The locked face, the mismatched halves, the wrong metals, the missing weight, the impossible spot. Each one alone is a puzzle a patient scientist can live with. Together, they describe a thing that behaves less like a rock and more like something that was built. The real question is what was happening behind closed doors when the people who had the moon data first started reading these old tablets next to their tools. Because for a while, those two streams of information stayed completely apart. The archaeologists had the clay, the astronomers had the rock. Nobody was putting them in the same room. That did not last. Before we get to what they found inside, I want to make sure you are still with me, because the next part is where this stops being a story about an old myth and starts being a story about a measurement. If you are finding this interesting, take 1 second and subscribe. It honestly helps the channel keep digging into records like this one. Now let me tell you about the night the moon rang. By the late 1960s, humans were not just looking at the moon anymore, they were landing on it, and they were leaving tools behind, seismometers. Tools made to listen for shaking, the same way we listen for earthquakes here. And the engineers wanted to test them, so they decided to hit the moon on purpose and watch what the seismometers heard. On the 20th of November 1969, the crew of Apollo 12 took the spent upper stage of their lunar module and crashed it on purpose into the surface. About 40 miles from where their seismometer sat, they expected a sharp jolt that would fade in a few seconds, the way a struck rock goes quiet almost right away. That is not what happened. The moon rang on for nearly an hour. The shaking did not fade the way it should. It rolled on, ringing through the body of the moon like the inside of a bell, long after it is struck. One of the scientists who studied the readings, a quake scientist named Maurice Ewing, told the press that the moon had answered in a way no one could fully explain, that it had rung like a bell, and that nobody was ready for what that meant, because a solid thing does not ring like that. A solid thing soaks up the shock and goes still. A hollow thing, or a thing with a strange layered inside wrapped around empty space, rings. You'd think someone would have stood up at that point and said this changes everything. Nobody did. The finding was published, talked about in technical papers, and quietly added to a pile of moon oddities that never quite added up. A few months later, they did it again, this time with a much bigger thing. A spent rocket booster from Apollo 13 slammed into the moon with far more force, and this time the moon rang for over 3 hours. 3 hours of shaking from a single hit, reaching depths the tools could not reach before, and still no clean answer for why a natural body would act that way. And if the ringing were the only strange reading, the scientists might have filed it away and forgotten it. But then came the mass measurements. In 1968, before the landings, spacecraft circling the moon kept drifting off course in tiny, steady ways, as if something below the surface was tugging at them. Two researchers, Paul Muller and William Sjogren, traced the wobble to huge lumps of mass buried under the moon's flat plains, thick and even, sitting exactly where they should not be if the moon had formed the way the textbook said. They called them mass-cons, mass concentrations. The moon, it turned out, was not put together like a normal world. It had heavy, out-of-place masses locked into its inside, and a body that should have been too light overall, both at the same time. That was just the story the public knew, the version in the news releases about winning missions and moon rocks brought home. Behind the scenes, a small number of people were looking at a moon that was too big, too light, hollow-sounding, and packed with buried masses, and they were asking a question out loud that they would never put in an official report. The question was simple. What if the moon is not natural at all? That is exactly the question two Soviet scientists asked in print. In 1970, Mikhail Vasin and Alexander Shcherbakov put out an article in a Soviet magazine with a title that sounds like science fiction but was meant completely seriously. They asked whether the moon was made by an alien mind. They laid out the oddities one by one. The impossible size, the wrong weight, the ringing, the strange surface metals. And they argued that the simplest answer for a thing that acts like a hollow, built shell is that it is a hollow, built shell. A built body, hollowed out somewhere else, and moved into orbit around the Earth. They had no idea, or maybe they did, that a scribe in Ur had written down nearly the same claim 4,000 years earlier. The moon was built. The moon was hollowed. The moon was brought here and set in place. In time, anyone who reads the tablet next to the Apollo data will understand exactly what that scribe was trying to record. Which brings us to the part of the tablet that the early translators left alone. What the Sumerians said is inside. The tablet Ni 2451 does not describe the moon as a solid ball. It describes it as a ship with an inside, the same way the hymns describe Nana's boat as something you could be inside. The text says, "The moon holds chambers." It describes a great hollow at its heart, ringed by levels, the way the Abzu tablets describe levels stacked inside a building. And it says those chambers were not empty. According to the tablet, the moon was hollowed out before it was placed in our sky, and it was filled with three things. The first, it calls the record of the waters, which scholars link to the Sumerian belief that the moon ruled the tides and the cycles of life, water, and birth. The second, it calls the seed kept apart, words the Sumerians used elsewhere for stored life, kept safe against ruin, the same idea that runs through their flood stories. And the third is the part the tablet handles carefully, almost unwillingly. It calls it the watcher that does not sleep, a presence sealed inside the moon, placed there to watch the earth below, waiting. The Sumerians believed the moon was looking back at them, not as a word picture, as a fact, the god in the boat, riding the hollow ship across the night, watching the world he had been placed above. And here is where the dread sets in, if you let it. If the tablet is wrong, it is a strange coincidence that a Bronze Age scribe described a hollow inside and a weight oddity we could not measure until we had rockets and seismometers. A coincidence that he described mass locked inside a hollow body, the exact clash the Mescans show, without any way to find it. A coincidence that he wrote caught and brought here, the exact words the modern capture idea uses for a moon that formed elsewhere and was caught by Earth's pull. That is a lot of coincidence for one broken tablet. And if the tablet is not wrong, then the thing in our sky every night was put there. The question stops being where the moon came from. It becomes who decided we should have one, and what they sealed inside it before they left. Now, the fair thing to say is that none of this proves the moon is man-made. The ringing can be partly explained by the dry, cracked, waterless rock of the moon's crust, which carries shaking far longer than wet Earth rock does. The weight can be explained if the moon simply lacks a large iron core, which the giant impact theory allows for. The eclipse match really might just be luck, since the moon is slowly drifting away and the lineup is only perfect in our own time. Regular science has answers, and the answers are not stupid. But notice what those answers need. They need the moon to be unlike almost every other moon in the solar system. They need it to have formed in a way we have never seen anywhere else. They need a chain of lucky accidents that made a moon so perfectly suited to steadying the Earth's tilt, driving the tides, and lighting the night that life on the surface leans on it. The natural answer is not impossible. It is just not simple. And it is not what the people who lived under that moon, and built towers to it, and counted their lives by it, actually wrote down. They wrote that it was brought here. So the real question isn't whether the moon is hollow. We may settle that within a lifetime as we put better tools back on the surface and finally listen long enough to map what is or is not inside it. The real question is what we do with the fact that a record this old, from people we were taught to think of as backward, keeps describing the sky with an exactness they should not have had. Either they were guessing, and they guessed right about things they could not possibly test, or they were remembering something. And if they were remembering it, then somewhere in the chambers the tablet describes, the watcher that does not sleep is still up there, exactly where it was set in place, still doing the one thing the Sumerians said it was left to do. Watching. The tablet sits in Istanbul today, catalogued as Ni 2451. You can ask to see it if you go. Most people never do. It looks like a broken piece of mud. But if you can read it, you are looking at the oldest claim humanity ever wrote down about where the moon came from, and it does not say the moon was born. It says the moon was brought.